Hello, everybody. My name is Emily Peters, and I'm here with Remaking Medicine, which are conversations with different change makers and creatives in the healthcare space. And I'm going to be joined today, excuse me, by Ethan Goldwater, who is a filmmaker. Hi, Ethan, welcome. We are so excited to talk with you today about filmmaking and storytelling and, in general, the act of trying to communicate around healthcare topics. This is obviously a big topic of conversation always, but I think especially right now. I was actually last week on election day presenting about truth decay and how we need to do a lot of work to build up trust and change the way that we're communicating around health, or there would be consequences. And here we are on the other side of that with consequences. So I think this is a wake-up call to many of us in the healthcare space that there is a huge amount of work to do and a lot of listening to do. And with that cheery introduction, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your work, and then we'll dive in on some questions.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And I couldn't agree more about the importance of these topics at this time. I'm a documentary filmmaker and founder of Hover Pictures. It's a little production house I've been working in for over 10 years now, that we're in our 11th year. We focus a lot on storytelling around consciousness and healing and topics around cultural evolution. We look at a lot of kind of alternative approaches to medicine, as well as working within some larger systems. And we do a whole range of projects. I mean, we really believe in creativity for its own sake, and we try things.
Yeah, and we're going to include some links to your videos as well so people can tune in to those. But I think it's interesting you're doing a lot of videos around neurology and mental health, which are kind of the least understood areas of modern medicine today. And I think it's really interesting. I was watching your video with Carl Deiseroth. I think I'm saying his name correctly. And you answered a lot of questions in that around optogenetics and, these new treatments that are evolving for, treatment-resistant depression and severe mental illness. But one thing I liked about the video is, even though it was pretty extensive, it left me asking more questions and wanting to go research more on my own. And so maybe tell me about, where in the process of communications or understanding do you think videos fit really well? Like, is this a thing that's supposed to whet our appetite? Is this supposed to answer our questions? Where do you think videos, and specifically kind of that 3 to 15 minute video, where does that work most effectively for health communications?
Good question. The work with Carl, really kind of lucked into connecting with him directly, and that's part of a much bigger project now that's being led by an experienced film producer and with closer ties in Hollywood, and so she's also working on a scripted adaptation of his book, and my work was in the unscripted realm. So we connected shortly after I think the book was published, and then he introduced us to one of his patients who was featured in the book. The short film that came out of that ended up being, I guess, 17 minutes. We're actually playing in a festival this week in Portugal, and we've played in a couple handfuls of festivals, and hopefully we'll get it out there publicly soon. But thank you so much for watching the private link, and hopefully there'll be a lot more news about that project, or that work as part of this larger project in the months and years to come. It's a big, I guess, set of topics and tools, and kind of groundbreaking work, and pretty mind-blowing to start to wrap your head around what they're doing. A lot of these treatments, people don't know about, or they're not available and accessible. So, for me, I think I've always been really fascinated by that process of kind of how people learn about, these new tools, or how people adapt tools to their own specific needs and environments and situations. And then, I think we all have like an intuitive sense for our own, like what we need for our own healing. And I think, when it's kind of magic to see people find what they need, and find a specific thing that helps them kind of get past a threshold, of, where they may have felt stuck or misunderstood.
I think there's an interesting parallel with the way that film kind of the narrative path of that film, and also the quote from him in the interview as well, where he's talking about, in therapy, you don't always get to the point immediately. You don't always like say immediately, like, how's your medications? How are you feeling? Like, how's your treatment? But you're developing a relationship, and you're, allowing conversations around books and movies and other things that are happening in the world. And then you get there eventually. Do you think that's intentional in the films that you're making, where you're trying to build in a little bit of space for that curiosity or that relationship first, before you just jump into the illustrations of synaptic junctions and things like that?
Yeah, I mean, documentary film, like medicine, there's a lot of really deep ethical questions about, kind of what might work, and what people might be open to trying. And yeah, I think, we can come up with all kinds of plans, and, people are oftentimes prescribed things that don't work, and or they feel were kind of they were misunderstood and told to do something that shouldn't have been there in the first place. So yeah, I think, the relationship with the people should come first in most instances, probably all instances, right? I think can meet and learn more. I think that's so. Yeah, with documentary film production, with for myself, being behind the camera, that's been a journey that I've had to learn a lot through. Kind of how to, when to take out a camera, and if and when to take out a camera, and along the way, and how to come up with a strategy together, as much as when might be called for.
And then another video that this one everybody can see, that I wanted to call out, was the video that you did around psychedelics with UC Berkeley, talking about that project. I thought that was an interesting place. It was almost like a trailer for the work that they're going to be doing, as opposed to like something very early or very late in the stage of that. Can you tell me a little bit more about that film and what you were trying to do? That was much shorter, a little bit more direct.
Yeah, working with the Berkeley Center for the Science of Psychedelics was an incredible opportunity. Is an incredible opportunity. Where we're hoping to continue that work. There's a lot of cool things going on, and Dr. Michael Silver's first this first kind of big study with using psilocybin in human subjects got me thinking about the aesthetics of psychedelics in some different ways. I think for a lot of us, and especially now when there's a lot more attention on psychedelics, and I mean, it's amazing, right? Like speaking of the changes that were kind of spoken about last week, like, psychedelics first on RFK's list, and some incredible. And I think drug reform and has been needed for a long time, and the war on drugs has kind of misunderstood a lot of the value of these different substances. And so I think it could be a huge boon for national well-being, I think, if these substances were reconsidered. But going back to the study, so he's looking at how psilocybin impacts the visual perception of visual prior. So it's
Mm-hmm.
like, it helped me think about, I guess, what a vision is, and kind of how we, how limited,
Mm-hmm.
we are moment to moment in terms of what we see, and how much we, project based on what we've seen before. So, I think in psychedelics, there's a lot of baggage around, the 60s, and the aesthetics of the 60s and 70s, and then a lot of, you know, suffering and guilt and shame around all the criminalization, and or just this idea that they're for partying and recreation, and probably most people associate psychedelics for that, and not with medicine necessarily, or with spirituality,
Mm-hmm.
when I think that's much more the origin of the use of these substances. And I think, there have been communities that have been holding them in those ways.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think it's yeah, these are huge complex topics, but to be able to widen one's attention around it,
Mm-hmm.
and and think about, kind of, to get people thinking about how they're seeing what's in front of them, and maybe opening their eyes to something new. I think these substances can help kind of create a period of brain plasticity, of learning. I think
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of the model, the critical period. Another researcher at BCSP, Gould Olan, does some really interesting work around critical period for healing, and not just I think for stroke victims and
Mm-hmm.
so forth, and not just with psilocybin. I think with MDMA she's working with, but yeah, there's a lot of psychedelic research going on that's incredible these days.
Mm.
So,
And how did you get connected to that work initially? Is that somebody that you guys knew, and were you connected that way?
like 20 years ago, when I showed up in the Bay, or 22 years ago, I started working for the San Francisco Bay Guardian newspaper, and that was around the time that medical cannabis was being inaugurated, and so I was covering that beat for the newspaper, and I visited every single club in the city of San Francisco, and wrote a guide, and I guess that was that, kind of connecting to the kind of grassroots cannabis community, and seeing the medical model in that case kind of like, create more access, kind of have these communities, and a lot of these spaces were just I had never seen any kind of collection of uh, like, use the substance in that way, and it blew my mind, and I think from then on I was fascinated by kind of altered states, and how people use these things, and also the research. At that point I was learning a little bit more about how in academia there's research being done, and so just so many interesting connections, and researchers all around the world who somehow had an intuition to try something, and working with the substance and make something new, and that's that's kind of the part of it that I love, is like how people, how it's like there's so many different possibilities of molecules that we're still learning so much about how the brain works, and there's all these substances that can do so many different things.
Yeah. I think both of these videos include some really beautiful animations of the brain, the junctions in the brain working. Tell me about those. Did you animate those yourself? Is that something you use an animator for? How do you create those visuals?
Yeah, in carrying capacity, David Lobser and Matt Foglia were key collaborators. And David, this was like kind of in the middle of the pandemic, kind of before this whole, all these, or a lot of these companies that have now gone on to create great products, and using diffusion to do animation, AI. So we were using Stable Diffusion to animate a lot of those pieces, and then and After Effects to kind of tweak them. But yeah, it was like I think we're entering an era where animation is becoming much more accessible through these AI tools. So that's
Mm-hmm.
an interesting moment. And you know, I'm actually currently working with a really cool animator here in Oakland on some new projects around ecosystem restoration
Mm.
and yeah, continuing to explore. But you know, I think you know, being able to have the more traditional tools and you know, hand drawn and
Mm-hmm.
the value of that kind of frame by frame work, and then being able to generate to go between frames, so maybe you know, it can be more speedy. And I
Yeah.
think that's like a really interesting. That's the space that we're in now, where we can, um, you know, these tools are available.
Yeah, it's wild. I was recently at a talk and they had excuse me, this designer who's now a professor. He's at Stanford, I believe, but he was talking, he got his start in kind of like skater culture. And his initial artwork that he was creating when he was younger was all using photocopiers as this tool, right? And he would put things in and then, you know, degrade it and put it in again and degrade it and kind of have it like get the noise of that and using that as a tool. And now he's doing that with AI today, where he's taking something, putting it in AI, taking it out, putting it back in, degrading it, putting it back in. It was really interesting to hear him talk about those kinds of tools in that way. Of like, it's not, you know, it's one thing, like any machine can make a copy, any AI can like make something, but the ability to use that tool in like an interesting way and like continue to have that conversation kind of with that tool,
Mhm.
is that something that like that sparks interest for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, as yeah, flying saucer attack, you know, stamp, all kinds of you know, mixed media has always, you know, spoken to me from just, you know, yeah, I think the era we grew up
Mhm.
with, we were like, you know, we had a dark room in middle school, public middle school, and and you know, we would, you know, have zines and you know,
Mhm.
the record shop, and you know, growing up in kind of DC area punk culture, that was just kind of the world of creativity that I grew up in, and then also, you know, kind of ADHD, kind of needing the external validation. That, you know, it's kind of a natural, you know,
Mhm.
process to do. It's like it's been challenging in some ways, you know, since moving here from New York. Um, you know, where there's just less people around. You know, it's kind of like, I mean, the AI tools help, kind of like,
Mhm.
oh, I have an idea, I need to like get it out,
Uh-huh.
get feedback right away, you know. And you know, of course, they all have their own character, right? Like Claude has, you know, a lot of boundaries, which is great, you know,
Uh-huh.
because I was just reading this article about, you know, Claude's very defensive about copyrights, and so,
Uh-huh.
you know, it gets triggered if you know, it thinks that you're gonna like violate a copyright thing, and
Uh-huh.
you have to like translate to a different language, and then like
Uh,
Claude, and then Claude doesn't
try
trigger.
to like scheme it.
Yeah, so it's, yeah, it's
Yeah.
I think I answered your question. Yeah, I think I know the artist you're talking about. Burton. Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
But yeah,
Yeah, it's, you know, I think there's that risk and opportunity because the things that we're trying to convey in medicine are really complex, and to like hire an animator to create synaptic junctions and just show optogenetics at work would be, you know, a huge barrier to entry for a lot of people. At the same time, so now, you know, it's more accessible, but at the same time there is a risk of like, what if it's not, you know, perfect, right? Of like, I think that's like the balance, right, of um like that perfectionism that we would want from like a machine versus if a human did it. And like, how do we think about that balance in medical communications, especially where, you know, does it need to be perfect? Like, how good is good enough, right? Is an interesting challenge for a lot of us.
yeah, right. As parents, and
Mhm.
I guess, you know, I just watched that Martha Stewart doc. Speaking of perfect,
Oh, I heard it was really good. I haven't watched it yet.
I loved it, and it was funny to me that she was so critical of it. Well, I mean, not surprising, also.
Yeah.
Um, and probably good for people to get people's attention. But yeah, but that's kind of a running thread, right? Because she likes things perfect, and she obviously has impeccable taste.
Yeah.
And and the film goes into some challenging relationships, and I mean, I just thought her sense of humor at the end was incredible. So, so I would recommend it. But yeah, there's a lot to be, yeah, there's a lot of, I mean, a perfect treatment. I mean, how do you find one, right? I think there's a lot of tests that we
Mhm.
even sets of tests that people won't even approach because they
Mhm.
are afraid of maybe knowing too much, like,
Mhm. Mhm.
might make them not want to do more. Um,
Yeah.
Patient stories and kind of connecting patient stories to research is a big passion, has been. I worked a bit with Bessel van der Kolk around his book, The Body Keeps the Score, and
Mhm.
kind of that book, I think, does such a great job of connecting patient stories to these bigger kind of concepts that have now become much more, understood around trauma and kind of whole body approaches, and just like the
Mhm.
limitations, for example, of talk therapy, and the wisdom that every one of our cells has, and kind of how, I think I read a post from Jordan Schlein on LinkedIn the other day talking about how there's some research about how all the cells in the body, have a memory, not just our brain.
Mhm. Mhm.
And yeah, I really believe that.
Yeah. It's an interesting time. We know so much and we still know so little, right? That's the thing that we like about medicine, is that that's always true. Um, is there a dream project or, series of videos that you would want to make, or films? Like, you have this depth of experience in neurology, mental health, psychedelics. Is that where you want to keep going? Are there other things that you're like, I wish somebody would pay me to make 10 films about measles vaccines or something? I don't know, something, right? Like, what would you like to be making videos about?
Good question. I mean, I think it's the collaborating in this space it's about developing a conversation. I think there's not
Mhm.
and it's often the intersection of different topics, and it's mostly about the people. I mean, about the people that end up being up for the process of going.
Mhm.
I mean, it's depending on the project. Some projects are much more, they're quick. They're,
Mhm.
because we have this experience, I think, we can come in and help with something small and quick. Um, and then there's some projects take years or decades.
Mhm. Mhm.
So, we do it all. I'm working on a handful of projects now that are in development, and some scripted, some unscripted, uh, some for nonprofits, some for organizations. So it's kind of a diverse range
Mhm.
of different.
Mhm.
We just finished a project last week, actually, that's going to be more widely released, with a new gyrotonic studio in Harlem.
Mm.
Some old friends of mine who are dancers at Ailey, Alvin Ailey Company in New York.
Mm.
They started a gyro studio in Harlem, and so we made a dance film that also kind of talks about the collaboration between the partners at FA and OZA. And
Mm.
I'm really happy with how it turned out. It's a beautiful kind of intersection. OZA does swordsmanship, samurai swordsmanship,
Whoa.
like swordsmanship, dance, and kind of uptown.
Oh,
Uh,
amazing.
yeah, so we're just making that public and kind of blasting that out this week.
I love that. There's actually, I'll add a link to our recording as well, because I just spoke recently with this woman, Sarah Kim, who is a physician and educator in Toronto. She made this incredible video about the sort of the experience of physicians and nurses inside a hospital. It was very COVID kind of coded, if you will, with all the protective equipment. But it's really interesting, her approach to dance in that film. It really is like Tai Chi. more than dance ultimately. And she has a martial arts background. I think she did it sort of unintentionally. But if you think of like the movement that exists in medicine of like how you wash your hands to scrub in for a surgery, right? Or how you put your stethoscope on, or how you wheel into the room. So she made this incredible dance video with these movements, but it just comes across in like such a Tai Chi sort of way. And it made me really appreciate, these rituals that we have, and how can we make those rituals more intentional, right? I mean, why wouldn't there be a Tai Chi that was based off of medicine, right? And like that, the medical actions, and like, why wouldn't we create these things, right? There's this opportunity, I feel like right now to, if we're in a period of sort of like maybe creative destruction, it feels like right now, and like, what do we want to build up for this next era? It really feels, and maybe overly dramatic, but we'll see. But, we sort of had this industrial period from like 1901, like kind of factories, commercialization, like a lot of our food and our culture and everything has really kind of existed pretty consistently over the past 120 years. And it feels like some of those things are being left behind right now in an interesting way. And what do we replace them with? Like, what are those new rituals, new culture elements that we bring in today? It's obviously much too big of a question for a conversation around documentary filmmaking, maybe. But to me, that's an exciting thing. Like when you cut branches, there's blue sky, and now there's new opportunities. So like, how do you create these? I was also just earlier today talking to another woman who runs a program that brings museums into clinician experiences in a really interesting way. And she was telling me about how they bring physicians in and they have a meal together, and then they enter the museum and they look at art together, and they have these big philosophical discussions, and there's all these rituals to it. And I was like, this sounds like a religious experience. Like, this is like very much like a religious process, like that you're talking about. And it's so fundamentally human. And that's another exciting area of like, how do we tell, stories like religion, like these traditions, like dance, they're so just like fundamentally hard coded into what it is to be a human. And how do we like play with those in like a new, interesting way today?
Yeah, I had an experience like this actually in the former Museum of Anthropology at UC Berkeley, as part of a project that we've been doing with the Lawrence Hall of Science about the future of food, actually.
Ooh.
And yeah, we're shooting some more next week. We've been shooting all year, and it's and the exhibit's going to launch next year in February. So everybody who loves the Lawrence Hall, great.
And the future of food.
So it was with Cafe Oloni.
Okay.
Lewis and Vincent, they're partners in this project that is it's like exquisite food, kind of deeply considered cuisine. It's a native Oloni cuisine off and it's presented in this way that's like it's a whole ceremony basically.
Oh, wow.
It's a meal that's it was like a 2-hour experience or something,
like an omakase, right? Or like what? Yeah.
And outside in the former Museum of Anthropology, and then it was awesome. I think
Wow.
I think they're like pretty hard to get seats there, so I was really lucky kind of brought in. And yeah, for anybody interested, I would check. I think they're going to launch a dinner schedule for the winter.
All right, I definitely want to check that out. Yeah,
for the summer, I think probably books out early, but it was awesome. And like just like you're saying, like and food is medicine. I mean, I think people know this or need to know that. And I think our national food system may get some revitalization, I guess, with the what's coming, because I think a lot of the conversation about the soil, I think, is really important. And yeah, it's a really interesting time. The big greater conversations about the epoch we're in, and right, what's So
we're relearning a lot of things that we had forgotten, which is interesting, and also at the same time completely like unsure what comes next, right? Which is it's a fun period to try to be intentional about what those things are that you want to bring forward. In medicine, we certainly see it. I've been having a lot of conversations recently with like, what is that role of a physician in a world where, technology and AI have replaced a lot of the like sort of expertise or memorization or fact kind of elements of that profession. And a lot of doctors, including my own doctors, like, well, we're just going to be replaced by computers. And it's like, oh, that's not what people want. Like people want, like there's so much power in that ability of somebody to listen and to care and to be physically with you. And that's such a huge part of what it is to be a clinician. And so, my hope is that people are thinking intentionally about that right now and not just going to let it sort of wash over them, because there's this opportunity. Yes, like maybe that expertise part is falling off, right? But what does that create? Again, like the branches are being cut. What blue sky is there? So is your job as a physician really much more as a listener, as a coordinator, as somebody who's, persuasive, right? That's a big piece of it, like listening to somebody's concerns and getting them to get the vaccine or to take the medicine, or what is that role that we want for medicine, if it starts to look very different, which 150 years ago with the advent of germ theory, that all changed, right? Where the role of a physician became industrial, machine, sterilized, you're part of like keeping things clean and sanitary and like kind of rigid, and that whole change only took like 30 or 40 years to happen. So are we at like a point of change now? Is just a really fun and interesting place to explore.
Yeah, you're reminding me of a few things. Like, I mean, your experience, surviving fatal childbirth, and I was listening to this podcast recently about kind of giving up and embracing uncertainty, and it told a story of a surgery, actually kind of this surgeon who kind of came in with all this confidence and kind of, as I guess one might expect a surgeon to, and actually allowed a journalist there in the room recording, and kind of in the middle of the surgery, all of a sudden there was like a silence, and like a cell phone rang, and everyone kind of looked at each other with like a panic, and it was like they thought that they had done like a don't do event, and
yeah,
this like, and it turned out that they were like a couple millimeters away from something bad happening, and cutting the bile duct in the liver or something. But the point of the story was about kind of embracing uncertainty and kind of how do we do that, and with all these new tools, and there's such a way that we can kind of prepare ourselves and make a plan and ask a question and get an answer, and just having the answers right is prize. So this story was about this podcast. It was TT book.
Okay.
Great. I'll send the link for the
notes on this one are going to be long. We have a lot of links to share with everybody. Kina is going to help us put all those on.
Yeah. We have questions today, a lot more questions for you about, the making of this book.
Please. Yeah. We have, another like 10 minutes. Like, yeah. What else would you like to know?
Well, I mean, I really love the visual chapters, and, I like, thinking about kind of like different possibilities and, for designing spaces for healthcare. I think that's like such a, whether it's color or, putting things on screens and to kind of change the environment of the space. Like there's something about, the healthcare experience that so often people have that's like, right, like you were saying, it's sterile, and it's in kind of inhuman and alienating, and and like, even just the soundscapes, right? Like,
yeah, there's a lot of really interesting work that could be done in the medical settings. I was at Kaiser yesterday it's a brand new, beautiful medical clinic. And once you go back into the exam room area, it looks like a maze that they created for like rats to go through. Like you absolutely cannot tell which way you came in and which way to go out. And they had to like, the nurses really try to like tell you, okay, like you're at 6 and the door is at 7, and like here's how you find your way back out. And to me, it's like, oh, what a missed opportunity, right? Like, unless that was intentional somehow, that they wanted people to feel like sucked into a vortex on the other side of this door. But it's a beautiful space. It was obviously intentionally done, and I do still think like, oh, it's really missing some things that are kind of essential for people here. And just to like push the envelope a little bit further would be so valuable to people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Speaking of sound healing, yeah. I mean, tell me about. I mean, the book touches on it with some stories, and then recently I have a friend who's been doing sound healing and acupuncture at the same time.
Okay, interesting. Yeah.
I'm curious to hear about like ongoing sound. Like, how do you incorporate that into your?
There's a whole world that's so fascinating around sound. And, there's one side of that world that's really trying to do like clinical trials and evidence-based work around how do we take sound and, like medicalize it, right? So what kind of music would be, evidence-based to help relax patients, right? Which is interesting. That's a way of trying to like move through the healthcare system through its own like existing vectors of power, which are like those research journals and clinical trials and things. And then there's another side, which I think is a little bit looser and freer around, there's a lot we can do with sound that can be either patient directed or can be like changed through like existing back channels without necessarily going through like the like systemic ways that healthcare traditionally changes. And in the book, that chapter with Yoko Sen and Avery, who, in addition to being musicians and incredible designers and sound designers, are also very gifted documentary filmmakers and video artists too. And so I highly recommend going and checking out their work online. Really using sound in this like just fascinating way of like what they did was they found a problem that these sounds in the ICUs were creating this really noxious alarm. And instead of just talking about that problem or being upset about that problem, they actually went to the medical device manufacturer and they listened to nurses and physicians and patients and engineers at the sound, at the factory, and factory workers who really actually factory workers were the ones who are hearing these alarms the most because they're making these machines and testing them in the factory. The entire factory has these like, noxious sounds of these alarms going. And through that process of listening, we're able to create. And what I loved about their work was instead of creating like a PowerPoint presentation, which would be my maybe first instinct if I was working with a big like international conglomerate sound, medical device maker, they made a video of people talking and the music and the sound through. And it was just like such a gorgeous piece of work that like, of course they were able to immediately get permission to change the sounds of all these machines and like convince everybody that this was such a beautiful and worthy exercise. And I just loved like that is such a leap of like taking the work so seriously that it's not just slides and a deck. Like you're creating this beautiful film that's so compelling and it's going to get shared and it's so beautiful. And they could do that relatively quickly because of the environment that we live in and technology. I just loved that. So yeah, highly recommend that intersection of sound and then their specific way that they use sound and storytelling and film. Just amazing. They're the best.
Yeah, kind of going back to the beginning about the conversation around psychedelics and research and yeah, like sound I think can do a lot to help people kind of understand the inner experience that others are having. And I mean with film it's like what people don't see that's the most haunting and reminds them of something they might have experienced in the past, kind of the suggestion. And then I think sound really brings things into the present, and of course, that's like the most immediate sense we have, and right, and the two kind of lace the future. So that's
Amazing. I love it. Well, I think we should start to wrap up, although we could talk forever about this new era we're entering. But where can people find out more about you and the films that you're making and the work that you do?
Our Hover Pictures Instagram, hover_pictures on Instagram, the website hoverpictures.com. Yeah, those are great places to follow
Great.
us, and maybe we'll do more on X. Who knows?
It's pretty wild over there right now, but yeah, that is fun. Well, this is wonderful. I really enjoyed talking with you, and I can't wait to see your films come out into the forefront more. And there's definitely a lot of work to do in this space. So thank you so much, Ethan, for being with me today.
Thank you for having me, Emily. Bye.
Bye. I'm trying to see, how do I